What we have seen is that the first league that restarted was the Bundesliga in Germany. Now, after 10 days of COVID rest, you could see 14 extra muscle injuries compared to the last time. And that's why prevention and preparation is so important. Now, whether it's COVID or pre-season rest, it remains the same. We see the similar injury incidences when you start a season already. So it's just been twice now. And the most important injuries are muscle injuries. And that's not strange if your muscle haven't been triggered the same way as the sport-specific requests are made. Meaning, if you didn't train your hamstrings for 3 months properly while you do football or football training, but you have to go individually, then it goes wrong. So the major challenge for our teams and for QSL was first to make sure that our training individually is tailored to the specific needs of a normal training. And that was a big challenge because we could not train together. The second challenge was to make sure that our staff, our medical staff, our technical staff, our players, and the people around the team are safe. Because it's not just the players being together in a dressing room or in a training ground, it's the whole environment that can affect everybody and spread very fast. Now, we have tried in close collaboration with MOPH, with Hamad Medical Corporation, and with our expertise on sports to create guidelines that have been mentioned throughout the country, throughout the region, on our website, and actually have been received very well on the international platform. To give you an idea, after we documented the guidelines, because it was unprecedented, nobody ever had to do that. After these guidelines were made by us, we got requests from IOC to implement that in their global strategy. So actually the teams have performed amazingly from a very uncertain position to not only protect our players and our staff, to not only reduce as much as muscle injuries as we could have expected, but to make sure that this is in collaboration with everybody involved, all the stakeholders, and that has gone in a message throughout the world, and especially the world of sports international. Aspetar, from his visionary point of 10 years ago, created what is called ASPREF. It's the Aspetar Prevention and Injury Program. That means that we have data from the last 10 years of all our registered players. That is such a precious data, not just to know what's going on, but in extrapolation of that, to prevent. So we know from, for example, football, that #1 injury in football is muscles, is hamstring related injuries. The second one is the knee, like we call the anterior cruciate ligament, the Rubbat Sallibi, other lesions like that, meniscus, cartilage. The third one is the ankle and foot. So as you can imagine, this is very related. If you look at a football game, it's or hamstring, or they touch the knee, or the ankle. It's very frequent. But the real vision of Aspetar has started 10 years ago with that ASPREF, where we had the most renowned experts like Professor Roald Barr, Professor Olaf Schumacher, Professor Marco Cardinale, Professor Karim Shamari, all teamed up together to create a program that has now been so beneficial and has now shown so much value during a COVID-19 situation, where we could really, based upon clear and very homogeneous data, show to the world what can be expected. And that's unprecedented because there's very few centers in the world that can do that, that have done that, and that had that vision 10 years ago. So the ASPREF in Aspetar is our prevention program that has helped the teams to make the proper guidelines and that now show what we can expect in the future. So we can even predict in certain ways to know what can happen with our data. So that's very beneficial to prevention, and that's only to protect our players in the future. Well, when we talk specifically about the Rubbat Sallibi, as you have mentioned, It's a very interesting concept because it's a special ligament. Why? Because it's a ligament that is installed in the joint, in the intra-articular space. Most ligaments are not, but that one is a special one. And it's a special one also because it consists of two bundles, which is like a DNA strand, helicoidal, surrounded by each other. So by that structure and by the position in the joint, it is in football quite vulnerable. And if you have it, you reduce your stability and you can have what we call concomitant injuries like cartilage, like meniscus. And then you get into a cascade of problems which we want to avoid at all stages. You have two specific types of injuries. You have the contact versus non-contact injuries, and you have the match versus training injuries. And very interestingly, you would think that injuries in football, they are mainly related to tackles or to contact or to put out of balance, but more than 50% of these injuries occur by non-contact mechanisms. So these non-contact mechanisms are very much in our interest, because in football you cannot avoid a bad tackle. You can try, but if you can reduce the injuries by 50% where no tackles are involved, that's our area, that's where we come in. And the same thing accounts for training versus match. In the ASPREF program, as I told you, that is really highlighted nowadays to prevent, we have seen that much more of the injuries occur in match, for example in European competitions, but much more in training in our regional competitions. And I'm happy to elaborate on why that is, but these are the specific reasons why we, with our program, can help, because by analyzing the data, we can protect our players much more. So the poor preparations are always, everywhere in the world, a reason to have injury. But poor preparation doesn't mean that you didn't warm up well or you didn't cool down. What we have seen, for example, is that when you compare the amount of games in Europe and amount of teams in competitions like here, for example, in a genuine European league, you have 20 teams, you have about 40 to 60 games a year without all the extras. Here we have 12 teams or around that, and we have 20 games, which means that our training to match ratio is much higher. What does that mean? That means that we train much more here than we play, while other competitions play much more than they train because of the specifications of their game. Now, if you look at that, the pitches for the match in Qatar are amazing. But sometimes in the past we have seen that the pitches for training were not at the same quality due to seasonal, geographical, climate conditions. And by our program we have identified that, and we have been able to spread that message to the stakeholders, and we have been able to change the training grounds. And by changing the quality of our training grounds, we have been able to reduce the amount of injuries a lot. So this just shows the value of data to prevent and protect our players. And that's what we have been doing over the years, and now is even more highlighted with the COVID situation. Yes, but many people think that in the mind there are more injuries of Rabat Salibi here than somewhere else. I can tell you it's not true. Our data over the 5 consecutive seasons clearly shows that you have around 0.08% chance of injuries over 1,000 playing hours. What does that mean? That means that one player out of 2 seasons normally can be affected per team with a Rabat Salibi injury. And that is the same in Europe, that is the same in South America. What does change in the region here is the amount of training injuries that are much more, and amount of re-injuries. that are between 4 and 8% and are a bit higher than, for example, in Europe. And thanks to that program again, we have been able to identify that and make changes to reduce that. So every region has its particularities. For example, in Europe, you have much more Rubbat Salibi injuries in Sweden than in Spain. Why is that? Because the ground is much harder. You see, so everything is intertwined, everything is related. It's about climate, about north versus south, about pitch hardness, about pitch rotatory stiffness, about the type of boots you wear, the type of cleats. There are so many interesting variables that we can identify and that we can modify based upon which region you play in. But the amount of injuries related to Rubbat Salibi are the same here as in Europe. So it's not true that there would be very big differences there. Actually, with our prevention programs that Aspetar has been a real trendsetter in, you can read it in all social media, you can read it in all guidelines that have been provided throughout the world, you can see that prevention works. And based upon our programs, we have been able to reduce the amount of injuries by 30%, which is huge. If you know that how devastating that can be for a career temporarily for a player, 30% is a great success. We want 100%, we aim for that, but we cannot forget that we're still a contact sport in football. So you can try to minimize, but it's a dream come true if we would reach the 100%. It all depends on the level and the severeness of the injury. There are many subtypes, but in general, for the elite player, we need to prepare a player with a surgery to give him or her a new stability ligament back, and then work with physiotherapy towards a great result. It's really a combination of surgery, player compliance, and physiotherapy that makes the dream come true, and to get the recovery that is solid and that is making the player stable again, confident again, and back to the level of the previous capacity. Well, there are a lot of hot topics, as we call it now. A few of our data in research from Aspetar has shown the value of specific ligaments around that knee, and the new techniques have been developed also by our center to make it better, and the results over 5 years are very, very rewarding. So yes, the new techniques are preventing new injuries, that was the problem before, and are stabilizing our players better. The moment you fix it, it's ready. But don't forget, you work with living tissue that needs to incorporate in the body, and in general our data shows that we need about 7 to 7.5 months to get an elite player back to elite playing. But for example, after 3 to 6 weeks, people can really start walking very fast again. After 2 to 3 months, they can start running. After 4 to 6 months, they can start participating with the field and with the team. But in general, the incorporation time needs about 7.5 months. Many players are ready at 5 months, but we need to protect them, to evaluate them, and to make sure that if they play at 5 months, it's fair and it's safe. And if we get the time to stretch that towards 7 months, we have that biological incorporation to make sure that it's more safe. But many of our players can start that process after 5 months. The risk is mainly re-injury, which is between 4 and 8%. And because of that, the players sometimes feel inhibited, feel a bit contracted, scared to really go and forget about the injury. So once you are stable, there's a big psychological need of support to make them feel confident, to remove it from their head and really play again while not thinking about it. And that's what we see that is sometimes a problem in the beginning. And apart from the surgery, it's also important that the physiotherapist is a sort of mentor. And we train hard on that with our teams to show the belief that it's good. And if we can show it by our testing, we really get there, and it makes us proud that we see that as a holistic combination. If you have a young career and you are out for 7 months, that plays in the heads of the players. Can I return? Will I be able to perform again on level? What about my career? What about the people that I support? So what about my teammates? Can they have confidence in me again? There's a lot of questions in the head of the player, and it's our job to gradually help them to remove that while giving stability from the beginning, giving the right treatment options and protocol, and making sure we do that individual guiding support. With the package of surgery, player compliance and physiotherapy, with the support of the mental part around it, we are very proud to say that الرباط الصليبي is not career ending anymore. But that means all facets of the treatment have to be well positioned, and that's where a house like Aspetar focuses on, because it's not just good surgery, it's not just good physiotherapy, it's the package. And when you provide the package in the way that we show, or that we have developed with our research the right pathways, this is not career ending anymore. The most important is not so much the time to recover, it's the steps, the criteria you build up in order to reach your target. And it's not just about feeling anymore, about talking, it's really about assessing. Our labs can now really identify some things we have to still work on, some things that are fine already, to show the player, now you're ready, or now you're not ready because of this and this reason. And players really like that. Yes, and don't forget that in football, it's a social sport. You play with teammates. Can you imagine when you are 23 years old, for example, and you have a 7-month rehabilitation ahead of you? You don't train with your teammates, you train individually. You progress, you train with your physiotherapist, you follow up with your medical people. So you are suddenly taken away from your biotope, from the area that you thrive in. So besides from all the injury types, what it affects in a family point of view and professional point of view, this is the crucial point. And this is where the mental part can play a big role, to help the player with some questions, some tools, some exercises mentally to cope, what we call coping strategies, to cope with the situation and believe that it's only temporary and that you build towards new confidence. Well, my message would be, go and have a look at the website of Aspetar, because we have really developed evidence-based guidelines with our teams from education, with our teams from MOPH and HMC, with our teams from research, to make sure these guidelines are met and can be used by our practitioners. But don't forget that, of course, an area like physiotherapy is very much affected by this situation and has done the necessary to protect the physiotherapist and the player. But don't forget that we are a region here that is very physical. People, they shake hands, people give a nose touch, give a kiss on the head. So there's always a very sociable, physical contact. And it's not just about physiotherapy of our players, it's really about the social patterns as well. So we have really created guidelines, but for the moment, after COVID, the world is not the same. We have to make sure that we make sure that we protect our elderly, especially our most vulnerable parts of the population. And that is the real message. This has nothing to do with sports only. This has to do with protecting our society for what is called a second wave. And I'm sure that with the compliance that we have and with the teams that we have and the discipline and the guidelines that we will manage, and actually with that we have already proven to be able to restart QSL as one of the few competitions in the world in a safe way. And we're very proud and very supportive to that. But it remains more a sociable thing than a real professional thing. The major message is the message by the country. Very simple guidelines. Social distance, wash your hands, wear gloves and wear masks. Now, in a general point of view, that works. When you extrapolate that to sports, it makes it a bit more complicated. And we have trained our nurses for swabbing. We have trained our doctors for guidelines. And my message would be, talk with your doctor, with your medical team of the club, because they have been trained to the most newest guidelines to make sure that we protect our staff, our players and our beautiful competition. But we remain a physical sport and we'll have to make sure that we are preventative for the future, because it's not zero risk, but what we want is to make sure that it's according to the guidelines. And that's what is implemented now, and I'm very proud to say that Aspitar, our humble house, has made a great trendsetter position in that. So anything you need, you can actually follow our guidelines.